We'll go ahead and get started. My name is Val Walters, and I have the privilege of being the Executive Director for the Ryan Bartel Foundation. Welcome to our September panel, How Did I Miss That? As you may know, September is Suicide Prevention and Awareness Month. So this panel is going to be a little different than the past panels we've done. Today's panel will be a frank conversation about teen suicide. Some of you may have watched the film that we streamed last week, Tell My Story. It's a documentary-style film that chronicles a father's mission to understand the loss of his son to suicide. It was a moving and powerful film that brought up a lot of emotions. Today's discussion may have the same impact. If you feel the need to drop off, this is being recorded and you can come back and watch at a later time. Tonight we are talking about teen suicide because it's still the second leading cause of death for 10 to 24-year-olds. According to the Virginia Department of Health, ER visits for Loudoun County residents between the ages of 10 to 19 rose from 516 to 546 in 2020, and there have been 411 visits through July of 2021. In December of 2019, there were 14 calls to the National Suicide Prevention Line from children 12 years and under. In May of 2020, there were 94 calls. That's an increase of 571% from December of 2019 to May of 2020. For the same reporting period, the number of calls made by 13 to 24-year-olds rose from 262 calls to 396 calls. That's a 41% increase. Statewide, Virginia has reported 87 suicides in 2020 for children ages 10 to 19. In the first half of 2020, there have been 40 suicides in that same age group. Tonight, we're talking about teen suicide to break the stigma, erase the shame, and give ourselves permission to talk about something that's really scary. Let's create a culture of an open dialogue about teen suicide and move it from the shadows to the light. Welcome to this important conversation. I'd like to introduce tonight's moderator, Dr. Suzanne Nixon. Suzanne is a Ryan Bartel Foundation board member and an award-winning licensed professional counselor, marriage and family therapist with over 35 years of education, training, and experience in mental health, holistic health, and meditation. Welcome, Suzanne.
Welcome, Val. Thank you very much for the invitation to host this. Let me know if you have any feedback on my machine. I'm hearing a little bit on my end. Are you hearing me okay?
There is an echo.
Okay, I'm not sure where that's coming from.
No, it's okay now.
All right, thank you. I think I'll move this phone over here. So welcome everybody, and it is a pleasure to host this, and I really want to say thank you to you all for being a part of this program. As Val read off the statistics, again, I want to reinforce that mental health is an epidemic now for our teens, and it is the new epidemic in comparison to the COVID-19 epidemic, but it really has been there for a long time. COVID-19 just really brought it all to the surface. And I want to say, I was looking at some of the research of 3 of the most common reasons why people are not talking about teenage suicide. And I think it's important just to start with that because you are all here and we need to keep on spreading the word, as Val and Susie have said. And the 3 reasons why we're not talking about it is that denial. A lot of people like to believe that this really isn't happening, and they need to hear the statistics of how it is happening in our state and across the nation. And so a lot of people tend to stay in denial that it is not happening because it's uncomfortable to really talk about it. The second most common reason we're not talking about it is fear. The thought of a loved one being in such a vulnerable position and the thought of a loved one losing their life by suicide is so difficult to wrap our heads around that our fear can paralyze us. And we may think that if we don't talk about it, then it's not going to happen. And the third one is this premise that people have, well, it's not us. that teenage suicide only happens to other families. It doesn't happen to our family. And those are the three most prominent reasons why people choose not to talk about or listen to teenage suicide: denial, fear, and it's not us. But now it's the time to talk about it. It has been the time to talk about it. And what we need to do is be the medicine. We need to be the lamp in the darkness. We need to shine light on this issue and really bring it to the foreground so that we can help all lives, one life at a time. So it's my pleasure to introduce the panelists tonight. And I first want to introduce Dr. Cam, who is my colleague, Dr. Cameron Caswell. She goes by the teen translator name. She's an adolescent psychologist and a family success coach. She's in private practice here in Ashburn, and she specializes in helping parents build strong, positive relationships with their teens through improved communication, connection, and understanding using her prime parenting method. Welcome, Cam.
Thank you so much for having me.
Our pleasure. Thank you for being a part of this. And I'd like to extend a very warm welcome to our parent panelists, Mike Dorsch and Margaret Brown, who are here to share their stories and experiences with teenage suicide. So thank you, Mike and Margaret, for being present and for being so courageous, vulnerable, and strong. Welcome.
Thank you, Suzanne.
So I'd like to begin by asking Mike and Margaret to share their personal stories. Personal stories really matter. It really brings it into the living room of our family homes. So Margaret or Mike, who would like to start to tell their personal story and experience?
You sure, Mike? I can go. It doesn't matter to me. I can just go ahead and start. My name is Margaret Brown. One of my children attempted suicide 8 years ago. And one of the things that I wanted to just bring up, since it was talking about what did I miss, I was aware that she was depressed. I was aware that she was harming herself. But one of the things I've learned later as we've moved on in the world is that I should have asked her if she was thinking of killing herself. That's something that I think a lot of people fear, because you think you're going to give them that idea. It never occurred to me that she was thinking of that, even though she was harming herself and she was in therapy and we were doing everything we thought we could. We'd gone out to breakfast that morning, had a great family breakfast, played games, did the whole thing. We came home. I went to read a book. My son went to play a video game, and she went upstairs and tried to kill herself. And it was well planned. She had notes. Thank God I found her, because it was too quiet. So I knew something was wrong. So I think that's the biggest thing, is that even if you know that your child is struggling, I would say, don't let people tell you that they're just being a teenager, that they're just moody. You know your child. And the other thing is, it's okay to ask, are you thinking of hurting yourself? Because, if you can provide a safe place, then, hopefully you'll be able, we're very close now. If she starts to feel that way, which she does still on occasion, she comes to me and tells me so that I can help her. So I think that's it for now. Suzanne, is there anything specific?
Thank you, Margaret, for sharing that and for giving us, so many pieces of information and what your experience was. And I really appreciate that you had said in your mind, you thought not to ask her if she had the intent to hurt herself or to kill herself, and the realization that it's a very powerful question and it's a very necessary question. And as you well said, oftentimes people are afraid to ask it because they're afraid that they're going to give the idea to actually go through with it, which is a myth. Teenagers want to talk about it. They want to talk about it. So thank you so much, Margaret.
Thanks, Suzanne. Again, my name is Mike Dorsch. I'm a longtime Loudoun County resident. I've been here for 26 years and raised my entire family here. I lost my youngest son, Ethan, to suicide in February of this year. He was 18 years old. He had been through a long struggle through some mental health challenges for nearly a decade that my family and I tried to help him through. Um, uh, Multiple therapists, multiple psychiatrists and psychologists, a few brief hospitalizations along the way. Um, and at the end, we did appreciate that he was at risk. And because we had been through so much as a family and had so much interaction with the mental health community and professionals over the years, I really considered myself, fairly knowledgeable about what was going on and how to support him, and try to help him through that as we tried to find more resources to help him out of the place he was in and get him to a safer place. Uh, After we lost him, I became engaged with the American Foundation for Suicide Prevention. I work as a volunteer both in the area of public policy and in education. And I've now actually started doing training for parents and other adults in suicide prevention, which gave me exposure to all the things that I wish I had known earlier to help Ethan. And when I learned more about what I really should have been doing to support him, I saw that yes, I was also doing a whole bunch of really good and appropriate things to support him through his challenges. But very similar to Margaret, the one key thing on the list that I wasn't doing was I wasn't asking him directly if he felt safe, if he was thinking about harming himself, if he was thinking about killing himself, or if he was making plans to kill himself. And he was. And much as Margaret related the experience with her daughter, Ethan was a big hockey fan, a huge Washington Capitals fan. And we were watching the Capitals game together one night. And, in the third period, he got up to go to bed and say goodnight. And the next day he was gone and we didn't have him anymore. And that's a tough place to be. Now learning more about the things that I wish I knew, so that I could have done more to help him. But any way that I can share my experiences to help others avoid, finding themselves in this situation, I want to do that.
Thank you so much, Mike, for sharing that. And I'm very sorry for your loss. So I appreciate you being here and sharing from this very vulnerable place. And as Mike said, they had gone through the mental health system, and sometimes the answers aren't 100% found there, but you do your best to get the best help that you can and use all the resources that you know of. But sometimes we forget that the resources are also in the family of just asking the question. And I know Dr. Cam and I have spoken before that the kids really do want to talk to you. They really want to let you in. Their language of communication is difficult. And so sometimes we have to ask those hard questions and we often don't think about it. Yeah. So thank you. Dr. Cam, did you want to say anything in relationship to what both Margaret and Mike have shared?
No, I just want to thank them because it's when you speak out and share your stories that I think it helps other people kind of normalize it and understand. So just really, really thank you guys for sharing your stories.
Yeah, ditto on that. So tonight, what I'd like to do is ask some leading questions, and this will be more conversational style. So any of the panelists and Val and Susie, if you want to answer any of the questions or chime in, you can. And then I know Val has the chat room set up so that if you have some questions, you can put them in the chat room and Val will then pause for a moment and we'll address some of your questions. So the first one is, what are the factors leading to the increased risk of suicide among teenagers? in your experience, in your research and what you're finding out, what are the factors that are increasing the risk? And anybody can respond.
I have one, unless somebody else wants to go.
Go right ahead, Cam.
Okay, well, some of the things that I'm seeing, I know there's a lot of things where we talk about screen time and social media and pressures from school. And I think it really boils down to the fact that the adolescent brain is still maturing, and it's always been at the same level of maturation at this age. But the amount of pressures and stressors that it's having to handle are increasing year after year after year. And so we talk about building resiliency and how kids nowadays aren't as resilient. And my belief is they are just as resilient as they've always been. They just have a lot more to be resilient to and really have to shoulder. And so I think really being aware and intentional about what your children are, what's going on in their lives, what pressures they have, what expectations we have, because our expectations continue to increase, and really being aware of what they are doing and learning on social media. So just realizing it's not the teens, it's the environment and all of the factors that they're dealing with right now.
Thank you, Dr. Kim. Margaret, Mike, is there anything that you want to say in response to what Cam has said, or perhaps another point that you'd like to?
If you don't mind, I'd like to just bring up the whole idea of bullying, right? There's a lot of that continues. And, when I was young, a long time ago, if you wanted to bully somebody, you couldn't just put things out for thousands of people to see at one time. You had to do it either face to face, or you had to, can you imagine, like, you'd call everybody's mom, their mom would answer, you'd have to ask for the person to tell them about that person. It just didn't work. But now with the push of a button, rumors can be spread, things can be said that can't be taken back. And children, not children, I guess teenagers, some of them, have told people to kill themselves. I don't understand that, but they do. And since you don't know where the person is on this receiving their mental health journey, right, it may actually prompt them to do that. So I think that goes to pressure. You're dealing with things that all the time. And again, if you get in a fight, it used to be just a fight in the schoolyard. Now it's everybody knows, there's no escaping it. It's with you all the time. You can't just go home and be with your family and feel loved. It follows you home, so.
Yeah, I really appreciate Dr. Cam's insights that, kids and teens really aren't different today than they were a generation ago. You really can't imagine how they would have changed that much, in 20 years. And I can almost remember my own teenage years, and it really does just seem like the world our children find themselves in today is just vastly more complex. The amount of information that they are expected to just routinely take in and try to make sense of is overwhelming compared to a world that many of us grew up in, where there were 3 TV channels to watch, maybe 6 if you were lucky, before your cable arrived. And I do think that stresses them a lot. And the impact of social media and the internet is so hard to sort out for them. I know for Ethan, my son, there was competing dynamics there. On the one hand, he did feel some pressures associated with social media and kind of the trying to keep up and find enough acceptance there in some ways. On the other hand, he had an incredible network of online friends that accepted him in ways that he didn't find acceptance in his schools or through other connections with his peers. And that was just one of the biggest positives in his life, was the strength of that support from those friends. I think it's hard, but I wish I had understood the dynamics of both of those situations better to understand what was going well for him in those environments and what wasn't going well. So I think if we can help parents also, have the courage and find the ways to productively have those kinds of conversations with their parents to understand what's going on in those environments, I think that will help support the children as well.
Yeah, I really appreciate what you're both saying. And the term that we use, I think you're familiar with, is cyberbullying. And so we are seeing a lot of that on Snapchat. We're seeing that on Facebook and on Instagram. And it really is where other kids are putting other children down and making fun of them, humiliating them, embarrassing them, or even using really bad language. And I'm seeing a lot of that in my practice, and also the regular bullying in school that's happening. And I think COVID has brought everything out of the woodwork, but I also am seeing another factor that's coming into our school systems is that children are angry. Remember, they've been away for a year and a half without their peers in contact, and the teenage brain needs their peer relationships. Teenagers thrive on their peers right now, not so much thriving on their parents, although they want your presence and they want your support. But I think the rise in isolation and disconnection our teens have experienced the past year and a half has given them both a rise to anger and not knowing what to do with that. Hence, they could be acting out or bullying. But also for some kids, it has also created this place where they've sunk inside of themselves and they're isolating more and they're spending more time alone and have more phobias about connecting, about being with their tribe, if you will, of teenage friends, because it's been a long time and they don't know how to do that again. So I appreciate what you have both said. And the other word that I'll use is that now in this fast-paced world with all this technology and all these pressures, there's also this theme song that's going on within teenage life and long families is, I have to be perfect. I have to be perfect. And one thing that I say to all my teens is there is no perfect. I mean, we're all imperfectly perfect, but you don't have to be perfect. And there's a pressure to be perfect. There's a pressure to get A's and B's, to be on these sports teams, to be on the winning team, to be on these committees and volunteer, and to be part of their religious groups and studies. And it's just too much. It's too much. But in the mind of the teenager, listening to all this, well, I have to do that. Either my parents, the school, or the colleges are going to require that of me. So it's also looking at the idea of perfectionism. Susie or Val, any more you'd like to add to the question?
Sure, I certainly will, because for anyone who doesn't know, I lost my son 7 years ago to suicide, and therefore started the Ryan Bartel Foundation in order to try and prevent this from happening to other families. And, I have many reasons why we failed, which is really how I think parents with lost children feel about themselves. You do have a sense of guilt that no one can ever take away from you. I think everything that you've just talked about, which includes perfectionism, because I know that we certainly, we had a son who struggled with learning challenges and had been in and out of therapy for many years throughout his middle and high school, just because of his low self-esteem. He was comparing himself with his peers, and then on top of which he was getting pressure from us as his parents to perform with his grades, and we probably didn't help. He was in his senior year when he took his own life. He was really just starting his senior year, and of course, when you're sitting there, looking at all your friends making decisions about college applications and what they're going to do with their lives, and he honestly didn't have a clue what he was going to do because he felt totally inadequate. And he had pleaded with us at the beginning of the school year to not go back to school. He wanted to finish his final year online through Nova. And we said no. We just simply said, you've only got 1 year left. You've made it this far, just one more year and then you're done. And it was almost like it was a series of events that included pressure from us, pressure from peers, pressure from his social environment, and not to forget that he had been bullied a lot throughout most of his life because of his differences. And so you combine all of those things together, and it became like he just couldn't deal with life anymore. And it's really well reflected in his final note to us, where he talked about not being able to perform in the society any longer, which was a total eye-opener for us. We had never heard him say that before. And by then it was too late. And I think we underestimate that pressure, and we don't ask the question about how this impacts them. And I think we need to give them some grace. And when they don't feel like finishing high school, say it's okay, because they can always come back and do it later. If they don't want to go to college, that's also okay. We have to let them find their own way, because they are still very, very young. And our most important job as a parent is to nurture them and keep them alive until their brains are fully developed, where they can make those decisions on their own in a much more mature way. And I also want to add that I have spoken over the last many years to many survivors of suicide attempts. And the one thing that I find is really a common theme with just about all of them is that they don't really want to die. This is sort of a final moment of desperation where they're in such a dark place that they don't see a way out. But if anyone had happened to have checked on them just in that final moment and reached out, it would never have happened. And I know that even with Ryan, because he disappeared with his camping gear, and he wasn't going to do it at home. And so he left his mobile phone so that he couldn't be tracked or anything. But when he was finally found, he had packed in his backpack a sandwich and a way to go to sleep, which tells you that he wasn't sure. So I just urge everybody to be vigilant. If you have a child who is severely depressed and is showing signs that they're not happy with life, don't take it for granted. I mean, you have to be vigilant and be open with them and ask them the question all the time.
Thank you, Susie. And each time I hear your story, I'm very moved. So thank you for sharing all of that. And I just really want to reinforce what you said, is that many times the teenager doesn't want to end their life. And I often talk about it as a therapist, as there's a part of them that wants to die. The whole life doesn't want to die. But in that place of darkness and despair, their brains can't figure another way out. So having the conversation, asking the hard questions, and also believing them. So when your child says, I don't want to go to high school, I don't want to go to catechism class, I don't want to do 5 AP classes in 10th grade, I don't want to go to college, believe them. Believe them. And I love that you used the word, Susie, nurture them. Nurture them, nurture the interior self, nurture the interior self, and help them discover who they are as they struggle with all these feelings, versus tending to the external conformity of what we think we should do and what we think is the best thing for our kids, because they really know. They really know. Anybody else want to respond?
I'd love to add just one thing to that too, because I think as parents, we have this need and this want to help our kids reach their full potential. And so I think so much of where we come from when it's wanting them to do well in school and wanting them to do well in sports and other things is from this place of we want the best for them. And I think what we're missing out in is what is best for them is a connection with us, and for us to listen to them and really understand what they need and not a need to perform. And I think a lot of times that gets turned onto our need for them to perform, to make us feel like we're doing well as a parent. And so we need that validation. And rather than stepping back and going, it's not about me, it's about them. What do they need? Because we don't want to push them so hard to reach their full potential that they never make it to the point of being able to reach their full potential.
Suzanne, I've got a couple of questions. I don't know if you want to address them now or if you want to continue.
We can pause and look at one question. Sure.
Is there any link between teens being more likely to attempt suicide if a parent attempted around the same age?
That's a really good question. And I was talking with a few people about the link of family depression within the family system. There is a correlation that if there's been people in the family system that have experienced depression, it could be a genetic disposition, and that if it was a major depressive disorder and there was a suicide somewhere in the generational line, it can have a factor with the teenagers. It can influence them genetically. And so if a parent or a family member has experienced someone in their family system who had a suicide, it could be related, but I don't have any research on that. And maybe Dr. Kim, have you had any research on that piece?
I do not either, no.
So if you don't mind, I don't have any research either, but what I would say is this goes to the talking about it as a family, right? Because I think I shared with the panel after another hospitalization when my daughter was older for trauma. I finally, you would have thought I would have done this the first time, but I did some research and found that yes, suicide had taken place in my father's family, but I had never heard of it. Never, because you don't talk about those things. And if I had known, I might have approached things very differently with her. And I now ask my other child often, not often, but like if he seems down, I ask him, are you thinking of hurting yourself? Does this ever come for him? It never enters his mind. But it's something that an entire family never spoke about. So I think that would be something I would say is if you know this happened in your family, then perhaps it's okay to talk about it, to say to your child, I struggled like this and I understand how you feel and how can I help you, right? To Susie's point, how can I nurture this so that this person is around for a long time?
Yeah. Thank you, Margaret. Anybody else want to respond to that question? Okay, Val, how about one more question and then we'll go to the second question I have for the panelists.
What do you do when your child says that they want to kill themselves?
So let me just see if Mike or Susie or Margaret, having had experiences what would you say now if they had been that direct to you? And if I'm making you feel uncomfortable, I apologize. So I just want to also say that too, if it doesn't feel comfortable to answer that question, but having had the experience and having known what has gone on, what would you do at this point?
And that's fine, Suzanne. I can take that question. Um, yeah, I wish I'd had the opportunity to have that conversation. Um, I think the first thing I would have done is I would have thanked him very much for having the courage to tell me that, right? And give me the opportunity to know what was going on. And then I certainly would have put myself in listening mode, to hear, what was causing him to be in that place again, to really empathize with the pain he was going through, and validate what he was feeling, and make it really clear how much, I was there and the rest of his family was there to support him. Um, and then step two, assuming I was with him when he told me that, I wouldn't leave him, right? I mean, that's the moment when danger's imminent, and we would have done whatever we could to be round the clock with Ethan until we could intervene in ways that we got into a place where we felt he was significantly safer than that. That part of the journey is probably going to look different for anyone who's in that situation, right? Depending on what your child's situation is, what resources you already have engaged in terms of mental health professionals, et cetera. But at that moment where I heard him say that, he would not be by himself again until we
Right.
weren't in that place again.
Right. So that did happen with me and my child. And 2 years ago, she told me that she was having those thoughts again and didn't want to live. And I did exactly what Mike said. I just stayed with her. And then we found, I started calling as many people as I could, and we found a place for her to be safe. And we took her there, and she was there for several months and then stayed in kind of a transition area. And it was just a place where she could, talk about the trauma that she'd been through, work through that, and try to solve some of the problems that just had never really been addressed. But exactly, right. If your child tells you that, take it seriously, and ask, and keep them safe. Do whatever you can.
Can I add one more thing to that too? I love, and I think the fact that you both are saying, go in listening mode. I want to just encourage people to remember that it's important to listen and validate them. You're going to be very afraid. You're probably going to get triggered and be freaked out. And your initial instinct is going to be, oh my God, no, don't do that. You're beautiful. You're too smart. That life's not that bad. And try to talk them out of it. And I want to just let you know not to do that, because they need to be heard. And when we try to pep them up, and this goes with any emotion, they just don't feel heard. And then they feel worse because they don't feel better. Now they just feel like, wow, I'm really bad for feeling bad. I have no reason to feel sad. So something must be really wrong with me. And I can't tell mom ever again because she freaks out. So it's really, really important that you take a deep breath if they say this. Like Mike said, you thank them, you listen to them, you ask them specifically, do you have a plan? Ask them flat out, do you have a plan? What is that? And I saw somebody in the chat saying, well, what if asking prompts them? This is one of the biggest fears, and this is what prevents people from asking the very critical question. It's not going to prompt them. If anything, it's going to prompt them to not do it if they were thinking about it, more so than prompt them to do it if they weren't. So please don't let that scare you away from asking a really, really critical question. It's better to ask and for them to say no than to not ask.
Thank you so much for what three of you have contributed. And going back to what Dr. Cam just said, if your child says that to you, it will trigger you. And we speak about that in counseling as a trigger is that effect of, something just happened, right? That's our first response. We get triggered and we go into this place of denial. No, this is really not happening, as I said in the beginning statements, or we go into a place of fear. Oh my God, oh my God. And we come from what we call an emotional reactive place. And we have to develop these skill sets, which takes time. And we practice this in other kind of ways of not going into an emotional reaction, but instead to open up our hearts. And to open up our hearts with compassion and love and empathy, and to really dig deep and to listen to what God is saying at that time. And then I agree with what Dr. Cam just said. You also want to ask that hard question, do you have a plan? And you need to ask it and follow that through. Now, if it happens that you are doing your 24-hour watch, you're with your child, you have a good relationship insofar as you're talking about it, you're being present with them, and then you need to go and seek help. And you need to go to that place that you feel can support you, which is a whole nother discussion we'll have at some point of where you go. Anybody else want to add before we go into the next question? Okay, the next one, what are the signs of suicide? So what are the kind of things that we see that tell us that a child may be at risk? What are the kind of things that either you saw or that you know of? Anybody want to respond?
Well, I guess I'll run through a few that I know about and I'm familiar with. Yeah, I think one thing to always look out for are significant changes in behavior patterns. It can be tricky with teens because they're not always in as much of a routine as we adults are. But if there's a big shift in sleeping habits, eating routines, certainly big swings in academic performance, a sudden change where a child who's usually very social and outgoing all of a sudden is homebound, doesn't want to see their friends, right? All of those are pretty good signs that something serious is happening that at least warrants some attention. Um, Classic symptoms of depression, not getting out of bed, not eating, irritability and anger directed at others. With depression, there's often a lot of internally focused anger. Sometimes that boils out, and gets directed at other family members. And those can be signs to look out for as well.
I'd like to add to that in addition to all of the signs that Mike has shared, which are things to definitely look for, and it's really, I think as a parent, you're going to have an instinct that you really see a change. I think one of the things also to be aware of is many of the kids I've talked to are really good at hiding it. They don't want you to know they're in pain. And so they will put on a happy face. And so a lot of parents are really shocked and surprised when this happened because it seems like their kid is fine. So that's not to scare you. That's more to say, don't wait until you see signs. Take action now to really create that connection and that communication with your child right now. Start asking them difficult questions right now and give them room to feel bad feelings. Let them know it's okay not to be okay. Sometimes we put on as parents a front of having everything together and being strong. And I know Jay Reed talked about this in the movie. He was always the tough guy and nothing bothered him. And it set a really difficult expectation for his kids. So right now, start showing them it's okay to be sad. It's okay to be angry. It's okay to have these emotions and give them space rather than waiting until they don't know what else to do with it.
So I have one quick thing. It's sorry, my dog needs attention. My daughter was very put together, always, the hair, the makeup, the whole bit to go to school. And then she deteriorated with her looks, right? Like just didn't wear makeup, didn't care, didn't do anything. And I again knew that, she was depressed, but that was something that actually one of her teachers called me about. He was worried about her because he said, I noticed this. And I was very appreciative of that he took the time to say something's not right with her. She's gone from here to sweats every day and not, and that just seems like not a big deal, but it kind of is, right? If you see something like that, that's kind of one of those behaviors, Mike, right? Like being sociable and then not, but also like either changing, the way they, not bathing, that kind of stuff.
Exactly.
So.
Yeah,
Go ahead, Susie.
sure. No, I was just going to say that it's, in our case, Ryan lost a lot of weight over a period of 6 months, and I knew he was losing weight, but he was also doing, he was more involved in physical workouts. He was going to the gym and doing weight building and things like that. So I put it down to his desire to improve himself physically. And when I look at his photographs from, say, right before he died to 6 months earlier, it shocks me every time, because it's such a noticeable difference in his physical appearance from a weight perspective. He had lost, he was like a rake towards the end. And I clearly didn't understand. And even though people will tell you these things, it's kind of like what Dr. Suzanne is saying about this denial, that no, I was probably saying to myself, oh, he's really working hard at improving himself physically, and I wasn't reading the signs correctly. So all those things that Mike was referring to about, changes in behavior, they don't happen overnight. They're very gradual. But if you are honest with yourself and you look back over several months, if you can discern a change, there is reason for you to start paying attention. And so go ahead, Dr. Suzanne.
I love that you shared that, and what the process that you're talking about is called rationalization. So he lost a lot of weight, and so as parents, we want to rationalize why that happened, and we want to look at it from the positive, and that's where we start to get into trouble. A couple of things I want to add insofar as warning signs is also notice the body language of your child. Notice if there's more of a hunching of the shoulders, or a slouching, or a kind of pulling inward, as well as if there's more of a pompous kind of attitude, and bringing the chest out and being more inflated. Both of them are reflecting that something's happening within the mood state, especially if it's something that's not a common body posture or gesture that you're used to seeing. Also listen to words like, I feel worthless, or I can't do that, or I'm not as good as Mike is, or I'm not as pretty as Charlotte, or anything that is self-bullying, the negative comments that teens make about themselves to put themselves down. That's another sign that their self-esteem is starting to sink, and that is a warning sign to pay attention to. Anything else that people want to add as a sign? Okay.
I'm not sure. I'm not sure I want to add another sign, but I did just want to say I really appreciate some of Dr. Cam's perspective on this. I think it's been a little bit of an eye opener for me. It's really easy to go through this analysis of what are all the things we should be looking for, and if I checked enough of the things off to make it worth having this conversation. In reality, I think we need to flip the whole construct around to some degree and just say, hey, we've got to normalize having these conversations about mental health. Without needing a list of 10 reasons to go do it. And frankly, with the pandemic situation right now, we've got a great excuse we can use for why we're doing it, right? I mean, there's plenty of reasons to just engage your kids now and ask them how they're feeling, and start that dialogue about their mental health.
Yeah, and if anyone did watch that movie, I love one of the scenes where the father, Jason, is talking to, I think it was a psychologist, And he says, okay, so what if you have a child who doesn't want to talk to you? You ask them the question and they just don't want to speak. And he says, okay, 7 words. And he said, you can pick one of these 7 words. It could be sad, depressed, lonely, alone, angry. And he rattles off a few more, but just say one of them and just tell me how you're feeling right now to start that conversation. And if you just pick that one word, you have to be really introspective with yourself and be honest with yourself about how you're genuinely feeling. And I do think that it's a great way to sort of bring out whatever emotion they're going through.
I just put the 7 words in the chat that you
There
were
you go.
referring to. It's wonderful, and it's a great, powerful way to help them label what they're feeling.
Thank you all for that. And I am,
Suzanne,
yes,
I know we're going to get to resources, but I just see a question in the chat that I'd like for us to make sure that we cover is that when a child or a teen says that they have a plan and it's very thought out.
you just took my sentence of what I was going to say.
Sorry.
Our next question to the panelists is, how do you initiate and have those difficult conversations with your child? But in the chat is, what do you do when your child says that they have a plan and they have thought it out? First of all, you sit with them. So sit in a close proximity with your child and thank them. Going back to what Mike says, thank them and appreciate that they're sharing this, and appreciate that it's difficult to share that and to open up. And then you have to go into your place of vulnerability and compassion, and then ask them more about their plan and what they are thinking about, or ways that they have thought of hurting or harming or killing themselves. And then after you've done that, you need to stay with them 24 hours. Do not let them out of your sight. You have to be with them. If it's like nighttime, be with them, sleep with them, just be with them. And then the next day you must go to your pediatrician, or you must go to a psychologist or therapist at an emergency room center or the hospital, and take them, escort them to go get the evaluation that they need at that moment. And in working with some parents over the years their child was at risk, I also let them know that if you do call the police will come to your house and they will handcuff your child or the adult that's at risk. They're not going to do it anymore. Okay, the last was, Dr. Kim.
I wasn't saying that. I was shaking my head because it's true. Sorry.
Yeah. So what
Me
has,
too.
and maybe that we're working on changing that, because I know the Ryan Bartel Foundation is working close with the Sheriff's Department, and that
Yes.
is one thing we want to change. Susie, can you chime in? Is that
Yeah.
still happening?
They have been looking at basically going to a situation of crisis and bringing a mental health expert with them, so that scenario does not happen anymore, where they are taken away in handcuffs, because they have been given so many reports about the trauma that instills. How the challenge for them right now is they get these calls 24/7, and finding providers who can be available just like they are, because they have to respond right away. But finding a mental health specialist who is available on such short notice is almost impossible. And so that's one of the challenges that they're faced with trying to solve right now. So they haven't officially rolled it out. They've been running some pilots. I'd love to see it officially roll out. It's a big gap, in my opinion, in our community, or really it's nationwide. I mean, we need to approach somebody who's in a mental health crisis with compassion. And we need to, rather than handcuffs, we should go up and hug them and tell them how much they are loved and that they're not alone. And this old-fashioned notion that they have to be dragged to a mental health hospital, kicking and screaming in many cases. You hear stories of children being, locking themselves in their bedrooms or in their bathrooms, and they have to break down the door because they are worried that they're going to do something. And I have my own story, which I will not share tonight because it's extremely traumatic, of a similar incident like that. But that's what we're trying to change. We have a cultural change that's needed, and it can only happen when we all have these conversations, because everybody needs to understand the impact, the terrible impact it has on the victim.
Yes, thank you. Thank you so much, Susie, for clarifying that. And I want to add one more thing to the person that called about their child that has a plan. If your child has come to you and said they have a plan, they want to talk it through with you. They want to talk it through with you of what their thoughts are, what their ideas are. They're reaching out for help. They want you to help them in that moment. So stay with them. And what Susie just said is touch and hugging calms the neural physiology of the body. So when we're feeling an intense motion, touch actually impacts the brain and the sensory system and the nervous system in a very powerful way. So with your child, cradle them, hold them, bring them to your heart, stay with them. And you may find that they begin to really break down and cry, which is actually very positive if they can let out that emotion. Still, you want to stay with them 24 hours and you want to get them help right away the next day. And as Susie said, it's difficult. So that's why we have resources we're going to show at the end of the program of places you can call and where you can reach out. But Dr. Cam, do you want to say anything too about the caller about the plan to add to what I've said?
Can I just say one thing real quick that I have to add? And then I do have a situation, unfortunately, with my child, who's the one that I'm talking about, and I need to leave for a few moments, but she's not suicidal, but she is having an issue. One thing that I would say is, if there's a plan and they share the plan, remove whatever it is that they plan to use from the home. And then I'll be back in a second, I hope. Excuse me.
That's exactly what I was going to say. So that's perfect. Yeah, definitely. If they're talking about taking pills, go through with them and find the pills. I think it's really important to let them know how seriously you're taking it. I've heard multiple people say, oh, they're just being dramatic. They just want attention. They're just trying to, and which is another way I think of rationalizing it. What I say back to that is, even if you're 1% sure, or you're 99% sure they're being dramatic and just trying to get attention, that's 1% enough to take it seriously. And then ask yourself why they feel the need to go to that extreme to get attention. So there's something going on. So give them the attention and take it seriously.
Yes, ditto that, doctor. Always take it seriously. Never doubt. You don't want to be that 1%. And lock up. I say to my clients or my parents that are going through anything like this, get all the medicine out or lock up all the medicine. Get all the knives that are tempting out of the kitchen common area. If you have a gun, please take the gun and put it in a safe. Anything that could be hurtful, even if they say they're not going to use one of those methods, take all full precautions, put anything that could be life-killing, lock it up, get rid of it right away. Okay, hope that has been helpful to our caller. And thank you for asking that question and for sharing your vulnerability. And I'm sure that your question is helping many other people at the same time. And how do we initiate and have those difficult conversations with your child? So we just started to talk about that with the last call. How else can we start to have these difficult conversations? What else have you learned or you'd like to share as pointers?
One thing is to take advantage of anything you're hearing in the news. I mean, kids are hearing a lot of news these days, or things you're hearing that's happened in the school. Bring it up. and say, hey, I've heard about this story. What are your thoughts on it? Have you ever thought of doing that? Do you know anybody that's thought of doing that? So whatever opportunity you have, even if it's watching a TV show, right, or a movie or something that kind of has that can lead in, you can say, what are your thoughts about that? The only other thing is to have continual non-serious conversations with your teen on a regular basis, or your child on a regular basis, so that when you do need a difficult conversation, it doesn't come out of the blue and they're like, what? You know, you've already had a steady connection with them. And so now it's difficult, but you're already prepared and you have that foundation laid.
Thank you, Dr. Kim. Mike, would you like to add to that?
I'm not sure I can add much to what Dr. Kim said. I think that's all really good. I do think that she and I actually had a separate conversation recently um, that maybe is a little more aligned to what can you do to help uh, improve the chances of success in having these conversations when you initiate them, right? Which is to think a little bit about, how are you responding to the day-to-day things that happen in your life, in your child's life when they do share them with you. Because if they're used to getting a strong negative reaction from their parents when they share, even, relatively small challenges or issues that come up, think about how hard that makes it for them to share what, really might be the deepest, darkest secret they could imagine sharing with somebody. And, if mom or dad just flipped out because, they got a C on their most recent calculus test, right? How can you bring this topic, bring answers to this much more serious question forward, right?
Yeah, thank you for that. And a couple of things I want to say that as you're talking, I'm just being reminded. If your child is in a state where they're feeling suicidal or they have a plan and you feel like it is, they're engulfed with that trauma, a technique that we use is, the top 5 things. I'm sure some of you are familiar with it. So you want to stop them for a moment and say, what are 5 things right now you can see? What are 4 things right now you can hear? What are 3 things right now you can touch? What are 2 things right now you can smell? What is 1 thing right now you can taste? And you have them look around the room, because when you're in a trauma response, reality goes out the window. And what you want to do is bring them back into their body, back into their full presence as much as you possibly can by going to the sensory system. And so you have those questions and then you ask those questions, and that can shake a little bit that trauma response that they may be in. So it's very important to have some kind of skill set that you can use. The other thing, insofar as having the difficult conversations, and I say this when I'm working with parents that have young children, start talking about feelings now. And I like to use the phrase, all feelings are welcomed. All feelings are welcomed. Begin to develop emotional intelligence in your family systems at a young age. And that means talking, listening, identifying feelings, and learning how to express difficult emotions in an appropriate, effective way. I was working with a teen today, my last teen client for the day, 17, and she's feeling angry. And so one thing I know with her is she needs to get the anger out physically. So go to the punching bag, go to the body bag, do something to get out that anger that's in your body, and that is going to help the system calm down. So have ways that your children can talk about that and express their feelings, and make it very safe, and try yourself to speak about your feelings and your vulnerabilities, that we don't have to always be perfect and have it together. We also need to show our vulnerability, and that makes the teen feel safer and more accepting of themselves in the making. Okay, Val, do you want to read one of the questions there?
While you're doing that, I just wanted to add one thing to that too. 54321 is one of my favorites as well. And because kids can really relate to that more than just breathing. But one thing I recommend is practicing it when you are in a calm state as frequently as you can, My daughter and I will do it when we're on walks, which is a great way to be mindful of your walk as well, so that when you're in that stress state, you can access it. Because when you're both in that stress state, you're not going to go there naturally. Your brain's just not going to think about it. So you want it to be something that's automatic and very easily for your brain to find it so that it works. So just want to recommend that.
Yeah, and I do that as well with my my granddaughters, and then with some of my younger teens, kids that I work with. We call it I Spy, and we go like this: I spy 5 things that you can see, 5 things that you can hear, 5 things that you can touch. So we animate it, and then when you animate it and express it, you tend to remember it better. We remember when we have expression.
Suzanne, one of the questions that came through is about finding a qualified professional and also understanding that the first may not be that perfect fit. And so can you talk a little bit about, I know it's difficult occasionally to find a counselor right now because everybody is so very booked, but if you could talk about the process and about finding that right fit for your family member.
Well, we happen to have the Ryan Bartell Foundation with us. I mean, so they have these great resources on their website. And so I first would want to say, go to their website and see the resources that we have posted. There's all different associations and hotlines, as well as recommendations for private practice therapists and mental health centers. So use the resources that you have and that you trust. You want to find sources that you trust. And right now, all families need to build their medical team. And I think of it as have your primary care doctor, have your therapist, or have a psychologist, have your nutritionist, or have your exercise coach. Have a team of people that help take care of your and your family's well-being. Mental health providers, we are really packed, and there's not enough of us. And we know that there's shortages all around. So I want you to think about going to somebody that is connected to a mental health provider. I'll have to say that sometimes if, like today, I got 4 calls for new clients, but if somebody says, well, Susie Bartell recommended you, or a former client recommended you, my ears are just going to perk up a little bit. I still attend to all the calls, but somehow I listen a little bit differently when it's a recommendation from somebody that I know of that have used my name. That also is a cue that somebody is really in need or at help. But I do answer all the calls just so that people know that. What's most important for your teenagers is they feel that therapist gets them. That is so important. So put away the credentials: social worker, licensed professional counselor, psychologist, psychiatrist, expressive arts therapist. You want your child to walk out of that room during the first session and say, I think she gets me. That's what we want to see. That connection with the therapist is really important. Now, if you can't find a therapist, try to also go to your primary care physician. They have a list of resources of trusted people that they like to refer to. And you can also go to your mental health centers, and they have websites as well. Dr. Kim, you want to add to
Yeah, I'd
that?
like to
Find a
add one
provider?
thing. Yeah, I'd like to add one thing too, just about searching for a provider. Make sure your child wants to go to see somebody. I think, I don't know about you, but I get people that they're forcing their kids to come see me because they want them fixed. And if kids don't want to be there, there's not a lot you can do. They're not going to open up. So my recommendation, if they don't want to go, rather than pushing them because they feel they're broken or they need to be fixed, I would recommend seeking help yourself to learn how to connect with your child and how to have the tools to help your child until they're ready to see somebody.
And then I would just piggyback off of that and say, however, where I would be a little bit different is if they are at risk and are saying these thoughts that they're thinking of killing themselves, or they want to die. We also call that the die voice. I want to die. Come with them. And so I do many sessions with one parent or both parents and the teenager. And even if the teen isn't talking, we're talking and having those conversations about feelings and about the thoughts that are going on in a very sensitive, respectful way in that family system. So I bring in the whole family. And Mike and Susie, anything you want to add about mental health providers? I know you both have had a lot of experience with them.
Yeah, I'll just add that it is can be challenging to navigate the network and the system and try to find that good fit. So I wish I felt like I had answers, but I can tell parents that it can be hard, and you just need to keep trying and find that right match.
Yeah, the only other thing I would add is that don't expect results overnight. It doesn't work like that. And you need to enable and empower your child to go as often as they need to go. If they want to go, let them go. I think one of the difficulties is the lack of health insurance to cover the expense of mental health therapy. And so for a lot of families, it can become very expensive. And so if you are feeling pressured to stop therapy, all I can say is that there are other resources out there. And don't ever give up on professional help, because if your child wants it, then you should continue for as long as they need it.
Thank you, Mike and Susie. And I'm also seeing in the chat box, and I want to emphasize that as well, is that safety plans are really important. So that if your child is at risk, you want the therapist or the professional to have a safety plan and develop that with the child, and then you share that with the parents. If you are home and your child says to you, I have a plan, I may want to take my life, then you can, after you open your heart and you support them and you talk and maybe cry, you then develop a safety plan as well, as best as you can, of how to keep them safe, which means 24-hour watch. Do not let them out of your sight. Be with them all the time, as well as take some of the objects that we talked about. And then there was one thing that you had said, Susie, and now I'm just slipping up on that. Medication. What Susie just said is really important. Let them go for as long as they want. But also I want you to understand the honeymoon effect. If your child has depression, anxiety, and it is severe, moderate to severe, and you happen to get the right medication for their child, sometimes, regrettably, it's a game of Russian roulette, which I don't even like to hear myself say it, but it is true. So I like to go to primary care doctors and psychiatrists that actually do a genetic test. They swab the mouth and find out what medications, psychotropic medications, will be a match for that person insofar as its effectiveness to help with depression or anxiety. That is really important to do, because there are some psychotropic medications that are not the right fit for a particular person because of their genetic makeup. So once the child gets on the right one, you may experience what we call the honeymoon effect. Oh, everything's fine now. They kind of seem like they're not so depressed, they're not crying so much, or they're not as antsy or anxious, but you still want to work with the issues that are underneath them. What is inside that brought this Great Depression or these feelings of wanting to hurt themselves to the foreground? So the medication, you need that, and the medication helps the teenager, or in some cases the adult, do the deeper work to find out what was the issue underneath this all, what was really going on, and then to help them and to teach them and to process, build skill sets, and so that in time they can resource their self. Okay, I just want to open it up then, Val, if there's any other comments any of our panelists want to make, or we can just go with more questions. Let's listen to what the need is, right?
Right, absolutely. So we've been getting some questions in the chat. I welcome anyone to just go ahead and unmute your microphone and ask your question. You can keep your cameras turned off if you don't want your face to be on the recording, or you're welcome to add it into the chat, and I'll be happy to read your question. In the meantime, I am going to start putting some resources into the chat. We talked about the movie Tell My Story. It's a documentary style film that chronicles Jason Reed and his the loss of his son. So I'm going to just put a link to that. You can rent that on Vimeo. One of the questions that just came in, self-harm and the tie to suicide.
I can take that. So a lot of people fear when they see self-harm that it is a precursor to suicide. That's not always the case. A lot of kids will do self-harm as a form of feeling something. They feel a lot, either they feel a lot of pain and the physical pain feels better and is more something that they can deal with more than the emotional pain when they don't know how to label it or how to deal with emotional pain. A lot of kids actually just feel numb. And so cutting themselves makes them feel something. So again, when we see, if you see kids that are self-harming, have the same conversations with them. Have the same conversations without the fear that you're going to be feeling, without the judgment, just an honest curiosity of what's going on, how are you feeling, you know, why are you cutting, why are you harming yourself, and how is that helping you feel, and get really curious and help them work through that. Then you can start helping them and find them help to find other more healthy ways to start dealing with the pain that they're cutting or self-harming to get rid of.
Yeah, I agree with that. And the way that I usually describe it, there isn't a correlation that if they self-harm, they're going to commit suicide or are thinking about suicide. I look at it in two ways, just using a little bit of different language than Cam. One is to wake up the self. So as Cam said, they're feeling numb. So it's a part of waking up. And the other thing that I see is a way of self-punishment, that if they're angry at themselves, it's a way to harm themselves, to take out their anger on themselves in a very inappropriate way. So if I had a child that was doing that, and then we start to talk about it, one of the questions I would ask is, tell me about your pain. Tell me about your pain. Because right now I imagine cutting yourself feels very painful or uncomfortable, or maybe it feels good, but then tell me about the sensation. What's it like for you? What are you experiencing? What are you feeling? I want to understand your pain. And then you have that conversation. Any other questions that people would like to ask verbally or in the chat we can look at? Somebody asked about what happens in the emergency room. I cannot say specifically what happens nowadays, but because of COVID, they may want to do a COVID test right away, even no matter what you're going into the hospital for. But in our area, usually people that are having some kind of a mental health crisis they go to Cornwell. And Cornwell has the psychiatric facility that they then assess the teenager or the adult. And then regrettably, often you are triaged, just like as you go into a regular emergency room. So you may have to sit in the waiting room with your teen until they're ready to take you. And then they take you back and they will, do a physical quick exam, but then they'll do a depression screening or the Columbia screening device, or they may do more forms of finding out how to work with mental health. And then they may recommend a medication at that time, or they may recommend that you stay in-house for treatment for 3 to 5 days at Cornwell. For some teens, they're also being taken to Anova's new facility in Fairfax, and that's the big teen facility. I already hear that their beds are already booked. And then there are a few other private facilities around here. Some of them are highly recommended. Some of them are not so recommended. And then it's, talking to your provider about the best safe place for your child if they need in-house immediate care.
So Suzanne, I was there in the emergency room in March for a situation like that. And it was similar to what you said. There was no COVID test, although it was a very different protocol. And then went to Cornwall. And one of the things that I think is great about Cornwall is that they give you access to a phone number that you can use whenever at this point, once you've been there. And it's very helpful for her. She uses it on occasion, and there it's 24/7. Someone answers the phone, listens, helps you get through whatever you're going through. But it wasn't like getting meds, but it was more of, and because it was COVID, the all of the protocol and all of the testing was done by camera. So that's what I know about what happens during COVID.
It's very helpful to hear. Thank you for that. Anybody else have any direct experiences that they want to share about what happens in ER?
We were there 10 days ago, and it was because my son took some pills and called the suicide hotline, and that triggered an emergency response. And due to a recent move, they had a hard time finding us because the cell phone address had not been changed, and it directed them to our old house. But hats off to Fairfax County Police Department. They spent an hour trying to locate us. And because of the nature of what my child took, he was still okay. An hour later, we were home. We had actually talked to him 20 minutes before the police showed up, and there were no signs that he had done anything like that. And because of what he took, and the cops didn't know, and we didn't know what the ramification of that was, they asked us if we wanted him to be taken to the ER, which Fair Oaks was the closest ER to us. So we were taken there. The police officer stayed with us for probably just maybe close to an hour and a half, 2 hours, just being there, making sure everything was okay. Talking to us, my son, while they got all the data. Because of the meds he took, they took blood and urine, did a COVID swab. They stationed a physician's assistant in the room with him, so that he was under their watch. Took all his clothes, his cell phone, like had him change basically into that, but they also took his cell phone and handed that to us. We met with the nurse, then with the ER physician. And I don't know if I said that, but they did blood and urine analysis. And basically they called the poison hotline to find out what the ramification was of what he took, because he took an overdose of his antidepressants, which, because he had not expressed any risk, he was self-dispensing. And they did a psych eval. It was the Fairfax County, from the Fairfax Hospital, they did an online psych eval for him. And basically they released him back into us with a safety plan and asked us to call the Teen Crisis Center that I think covers all of Loudoun, Fairfax, Arlington, Prince William County. They're based out of Manassas and one in Aldie, I think, and have provided for in-home. They did an intake. They have in-home counseling that they're providing to him right now, 3 hours a week. And also whatever other therapy and that he is going through at this point of time. And I have to say, everybody from the point to the police officer showing up and being extremely compassionate and understanding and telling him that, he was not in trouble and how valuable he was, and that they were just there to help him, to the doctors, nurses, physician's assistant, ambulance, the EMTs, everybody was just absolutely fabulous in how well they took care of him and how valued they made him feel and heard how he was heard in that whole process. So, and there was a COVID test too. So,
Thank you so much, Sudita, for sharing that story and your experience. And I'm glad that your son is okay and that they found you.
yes, I mean, it was amazing that they literally, they told me that the call was routed through 4 different places before they could find us. And we just moved and we changed our address everywhere, but my phone is, cell phone is on auto pay with never seeing a paper bill.
Mhm.
And we missed that one address change, but they were really calm. Like you could tell that they were stressed. There were 3 cars that showed up at our house because they had literally been searching for us. So,
And I'm glad you had that positive experience with a team that knew what they were doing and led with compassion. So that's very positive. I'm just noticing time. I know we have to end in just a few minutes, but there's one other question that somebody had posted. I just want to give some words around that. It said, my son had no signs, no symptoms, no note. We were completely unaware of his depression. Yet he tried to kill himself. He's continued to deny attempting suicide. We are trying to talk with him. He is seeing a psychiatrist, is also stumped and not sure what to do. So if I'm working with a teenager and say I'm stumped, that's when I do family therapy. That's when I have everybody come in, and I'm trained as a family therapist, and I try to look at what's happening within the system. What's happening within the system that this teenager is experiencing these kind of feelings. And it's not about blaming anybody or saying that you're wrong, but there's a dynamic happening within the family that's going to give me clues to understand that what could be happening to your child. And then I can be what I call, the search detective here, and use my psychological skills to understand what perhaps could be going on that's contributing to this feeling state. Okay, before we end, I just want to see if there's any last comments that any of the panelists want to say to our listeners, either words of encouragement or hope, resiliency. What would you like as your parting words to our audience today, or listeners?
Just, I feel very lucky that I can continue to support like I just did, and will continue to do so. And I am very lucky to do that, but I would say it's tiring, but take care of yourself too. Find ways to take care of yourself. As they age, their brains mature and they start to take care of themselves as best they can, but you also have to take care of yourself. So.
Thank you, Margaret.
Suzanne, I guess I'd close with 2 thoughts. One, again, is just have the courage to be vulnerable and have that conversation with your child, and ask them very directly if they're thinking about harming themselves. And 2, I would say, trust your gut and your instincts and what you see over anything else. There's lots of great mental health professionals out there who are essential to helping, but you can't count on just them and trust them. My child saw dozens of professionals over nearly 10 years, and not once did one of them tell us that he was at risk. And in retrospect, there was multiple risk factors for him. So trust your gut and have the courage to have the conversation.
I'd like to piggyback off of what Mike said too, when and someone in the chat said there's no signs. And so what I'd like to say is start today. Don't wait for any signs. Just start right now, connecting with your teen, making sure your teen is okay, that they know they matter. You think they do, they don't. They tell me that all the time. So tell them over and over again that they matter, and just start right now before it gets to the point where you have so many signs or you're caught off guard because you had no idea. And that's something that, and as Suzanne was talking, it's about the whole family. So bringing the whole family together and really strengthening that connection and that communication is essential.
I'm going to add one more, which is acceptance. It's one of my favorite words because
Mm.
we tend to want to mold our children to be a certain type of individual, and we can't. They are their own unique selves, and we need to allow them to be that. Just accept them for who they are. Don't change them. Just let them be. And they are beautiful individuals, just with all their imperfections, because none of us are perfect. To echo Suzanne's opening words.
Thank you, Susie. And I have two things I want to say. I have a quote that I would love to read. It's from Joseph Campbell, and one of you can type it in because I'm not really good at typing and talking at the same time. It's, "The cave you fear to enter holds the treasure you seek." The cave you fear to enter holds the treasure you seek. And what I mean by that is any fear you may have or hesitancy about having this conversation about life and death and thoughts, now's the time to walk into that cave and have the conversation. And you will find the treasure, meaning you will begin to make the connection with your child that they are longing to have, despite what they may say. They are longing to have, despite what they may say. The second is give yourself grace. There is no perfect parent. We will all screw up. We all make mistakes. Give yourself grace. And what's important is you become aware of the things that perhaps you did that were unhelpful and how you could make them more helpful. And I always use that word when I'm with parents, and especially if I'm counseling in the family system. Was that helpful for you? No, that wasn't helpful. What would have been more helpful for you? And that's a nice word and question to ask your teen. So give yourself grace. There's no perfect parent. You just want to get that awareness of how I can do something different this time, and then trust into that. Trust into your goodness, trust into your love, because that's what you're about and that's what they're about. And that's why we're all here, because of our love and our care and our compassion. So practice that mindfully in your day-to-day. Thank you for joining us, panelists. I so appreciate your courage and your strength and your vulnerability and being here. And I know people are going to walk away with a lot of takeaways. So thank you again. And thank you to the Ryan Bartell Foundation. You all are, I mean, I'm on the board, but I have to say these two ladies are doing a fabulous job of running programs, of educating our community, our police department, our sheriff's office, first responders, schools, LCPS. They are doing everything they can to educate people about this epidemic and to be the helping hand and to be the listening voice and the caring heart. So thank you.
Well, thank you, Suzanne, and thank you to the panelists, and thank you to everyone who shared their story. We really appreciate you, and you are now helping create that culture that we can talk about suicide and make it an acceptable conversation, and allowing our teens to join into that conversation. So thank you very much. Good night. I will send out an email with a lot of resources to all of you tomorrow, as well as the link to the movie. And if you didn't get a chance to complete that survey, please, if you wouldn't mind, I'll pop it back into the chat and you can just copy that and complete that survey. That will, your feedback allows us to continue to bring these types of programs to you. So thank you again, good night, and we will see you at the next panel.